$3.7 trillion. That's America's infrastructure funding gap in 2025, up from $2.59 trillion in 2021. Up, not down, up. And here's the paradox that should terrify every economist. While that gap increased by $1.1 trillion, the American Society of Civil Engineers just gave US infrastructure its highest grade in history. ASCE, the grade improved, the gap got worse. Same report, opposite directions. And I'm going to show you exactly how they pulled off this accounting trick. March 25th, 2025. The American Society of Civil Engineers releases its infrastructure report card. Media headlines focus on the grade. C, first time ever. Up from C-, bridges improved, roads improved, ports got a B. Darren Olson, the report chair, tells Congress this proves investment works. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, $1.2 trillion, signed in 2021, is paying off. Finally, America's infrastructure is recovering, except that's not what the numbers show. The celebration lasted 48 hours. Then analysts started reading the full report. Page 47. The economic analysis section. Total investment needed from 2024 to 2033, $9.1 trillion. Currently planned investment, $5.4 trillion. The gap, $3.7 trillion. In 2021, the ASCE estimated a $2.59 trillion gap. In 4 years, that shortfall grew by $1.11 trillion. 43% worse, while the grade improved. How does infrastructure get better while the problem gets bigger? Here it is, the 2025 report. $9.1 trillion in investment needs. $5.4 trillion planned. Gap of $3.7 trillion. Now compare that to 2021. $7.3 trillion needed. $4.7 trillion planned. Gap of $2.59 trillion. The need grew 25%. Planned investment grew 15%. The gap expanded 43%. The math doesn't lie. The grade improved because of temporary money. The gap grew because the structural problem got worse. But here's what the media missed when they celebrated that C grade. They confused cash flow with capability. The IIJA pumped $550 billion into infrastructure from 2022 through 2026. That's annual funding roughly double previous levels. Of course, conditions improved. You inject that much money into deteriorating systems and grades go up. But September 30th, 2026, 17 months from now, that funding stops. The IIJA expires, and I'm going to show you what happens next. If this kind of financial systems analysis is new to you, you're exactly where you need to be. We expose these budget accounting tricks every week. Hit subscribe. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act wasn't designed as sustainable funding. It was an emergency injection, like giving a heart attack patient adrenaline. It works, vitals improve, but when the adrenaline wears off, if you haven't fixed the underlying condition, the patient crashes harder than before. Congress knew this. The ASCE engineers knew this. They published the improved grades anyway, and buried the funding crisis on page 47. Stop. Before I show you how Congress financed this temporary fix, you need to understand why it can't continue. The IIJA's $1.2 trillion came from creative accounting, $210 billion in repurposed COVID relief funds, $67 billion from a wireless spectrum auction, $56 billion from projected economic growth, money that doesn't exist yet, $53 billion from unemployment insurance states didn't spend. And here's the key mechanism: advance appropriations. Congress authorized the money upfront for 5 years, guaranteed. No annual fights. Agencies could plan long-term projects knowing the money was locked in. That certainty is what improved the grades, and that certainty expires in 2026. And here's where this becomes your problem. The Highway Trust Fund, the primary funding source for roads and bridges, has operated in deficit since 2008, every single year. Congress fills the gap with general fund transfers. Since 2008, $275 billion transferred from general revenue. That's taxpayer money, not user fees from gas taxes. The IIJA added $118 billion more in transfers. If you pay federal taxes, you're subsidizing infrastructure that gas taxes were supposed to cover. Quick question. Did you know your income taxes fund highways? Type yes. If you knew this, know if this is news to you. Here's why the Highway Trust Fund can't sustain current spending. Gas tax revenue, flat since 1993 at 18.4 cents per gallon, not adjusted for inflation. In 1993, that bought actual construction. In 2025, it buys planning meetings. Meanwhile, costs increased. Vehicle fuel efficiency increased, reducing gas consumption. Electric vehicles pay zero gas tax. The Congressional Budget Office projects a $40 billion annual gap starting in 2027. $40 billion. Every year. Forever. Send this to anyone who thinks the infrastructure crisis is solved. State transportation departments face the same impossible math. The IIJA gave them temporary budget increases. They started projects they couldn't have afforded in 2020. Bridge replacements, highway widenings, transit expansions, all planned assuming those funding levels would continue. September 2026, the money drops. But the projects still need to be finished. The new infrastructure still needs maintenance. States will face a choice: abandon half-finished projects or raid maintenance budgets to complete construction. Either way, deferred maintenance restarts. The cycle that created the crisis. This is called the fiscal cliff problem, and every infrastructure analyst saw it coming. The ASCE knew, Congress knew, state dots knew. The improved grades reflect projects completed with temporary money. The increased gap reflects long-term needs that temporary money can't address. It's like taking out a payday loan to fix your roof. Yeah, your roof is fixed, but now you also have a loan payment you can't afford. Wait, I know what you're thinking. Congress will just extend the funding. Let me show you why that's not happening. Here's the Congressional Research Service analysis. Highway Trust Fund projected annual gap after IIJA expiration. $40 billion every year. To maintain current spending levels, Congress would need to find $40 billion annually from general revenue. And it gets worse. Inflation eroded the IIJA's purchasing power by 16.5% through 2026. That $550 billion in new spending only bought $459 billion worth of actual construction. Remember those improved grades? They cost more than Congress allocated. This is why I investigate budget accounting. Subscribe if you want to see what else federal agencies are hiding behind improved metrics. But we're not done. Because highways aren't the worst problem. Transit systems are. Public transportation received $108 billion from the IIJA, 67% funding increase from previous levels. Agencies hired workers, bought new trains and buses, expanded service. Ridership recovered to 85% of pre-pandemic levels. All good news. Except transit revenue depends on ridership. And ridership is still 15% below 2019. After the IIJA funding ends, transit agencies face what industry officials call an extinction-level fiscal cliff. Some agencies project service cuts of 50% or more. Let's talk about people. The IIJA created 1 million infrastructure jobs. Welders, heavy equipment operators, bridge inspectors, civil engineers. They left other industries for this work because Congress promised 5 years of funding. Some bought homes near project sites. Some relocated families. Some left submarine manufacturing or private construction. The Transportation for America group warns, if funding stops in 2026, these workers won't come back. You can't just restart a skilled infrastructure workforce. It takes years to train welders who can work on bridges. When the money stops, they move to other sectors. Permanently. The ASCE estimates American families currently pay $1,400 per year in hidden infrastructure costs, longer commutes due to congestion, vehicle repairs from potholes, lost economic productivity from unreliable transit, water main breaks, power outages. That's the cost of deferred maintenance. The IIJA temporarily improves some of that. But the metrics don't show what happens when half-finished projects stall in 2027, when transit routes get cut, when bridge repairs get re-deferred. They don't teach this in economics classes. Politicians tout the improved grade. Engineers warn about the increased gap. Now you know what budget analysts have calculated. Temporary improvements mask structural collapse. Have you personally experienced infrastructure failure that cost you money or time? Share your experience below. I want to understand the real economic impact on families. And here's the part about the future. Because September 30th, 2026 isn't just when the IIJA expires. It's also a presidential election year. The law that financed infrastructure improvement runs out right before voters decide the next administration. Perfect timing for politicians to make promises. Terrible timing for budget certainty. State DOTs need to know funding levels 2 to 3 years in advance to plan major projects. They have 17 months. No proposed replacement legislation, no consensus on funding mechanisms, and an election that will reset all negotiations. I saved the most disturbing projection for last. 2021. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passes. $550 billion over 5 years. Annual federal infrastructure spending doubles. Conditions improve. Grades increase. 2027. IIJA expires. Annual spending drops 40% overnight. Highway funding remains stable from dedicated taxes. Transit and rail funding collapsed by 55%. The ratio between highway and transit investment shifts from 1.85 to 1 up to 2.83 to 1. Transit systems that expanded service in 2023 cut routes by 2028. Projects started in 2024 stall, incomplete in 2027. States face maintenance backlogs they can't fund. Check the ASCE's 2029 report card. My prediction? Grades collapse back to D-range because temporary money created the illusion of improvement while the structural problem accelerated. Send this to anyone planning infrastructure investments. They need to see the 2026 cliff before they commit capital. Here's what state transportation departments are saying. The American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials surveyed members in 2025. Key finding: states cannot sustain current project levels without IIJA equivalent federal funding. They're already planning 2027 budget cuts, some states slowing project approvals, others prioritizing preservation over expansion, all of them preparing for fiscal reality after September 2026. Remember the $3.7 trillion gap from earlier. Remember the improved C grade. This is how the gap becomes real. You will experience this directly. The bridge replacement delayed another decade. The transit route that gets cut, the highway expansion that stalls at 40% completion. This isn't a future problem. States are making 2027 decisions right now. Subscribe to understand which infrastructure investments will actually get completed before the money runs out. So let's wrap with uncomfortable economics. The ASCE gave America's infrastructure a C because the IIJA injected cash that temporarily improved conditions. But that cash expires in 17 months. The funding gap increased because long-term needs exceed short-term spending. Inflation eroded purchasing power. Deferred maintenance compounded. Climate resilience requirements added costs. The underlying problem, sustainable funding, never got solved. Here's my controversial take. The improved grade isn't progress. It's a marketing decision. The ASCE wanted to show that investment works, so Congress would continue funding. They're not wrong. Investment does work, but temporary investment for permanent problems creates the illusion of improvement while guaranteeing future collapse. Tell me I'm wrong in the comments. Show me the sustainable funding mechanism that doesn't rely on deficit spending or general fund transfers. You can't unknow this accounting trick. Every infrastructure headline celebrating improved grades, you'll look for the funding gap buried in the report. Every politician promising infrastructure week, you'll ask where the sustainable revenue comes from. What will you demand from elected officials now that you understand the math? What infrastructure topic should I investigate next? Most insightful suggestion gets the deep dive. Next up, I'm investigating the 68 bridges the NTSB says could be the next Baltimore collapse. They've identified the specific spans. They've calculated the risk at 30 times above acceptable levels. States haven't done the vulnerability assessments. Why? Same economics we just exposed. Running the assessment officially documents liability that insurance companies will price into coverage. If these financial systems investigations matter to you, subscribe and hit the bell. I expose what federal reports bury and what infrastructure advocates won't admit. Every investigation. Every week, click here for the bridge risk analysis. Or watch the Baltimore $4 billion insurance breakdown if you missed it. See you in the next financial investigation.